Good morning and welcome to Sunday School at Second Baptist. I'm glad to be with you today. We missed a week last week while Clint and I were traveling. I still managed to not do enough lessons ahead of time, and then with the mix-up and then Daniel and Christy's little Chris being in the hospital, our buggy wheels fell off our buggy, but we're get going again. I'm going to videotape this, and whenever Daniel can do it, then we'll get it posted up, and then we'll go for the next one. But if you've looked in your book, then you may have noticed that this is the last lesson for the book of Daniel. And I just, would love Daniel to go on and on. There's so many things there, and some that we had to skip even, and so... but we're going to try to conclude then with some of the final visions of Daniel and end up at the end of the chapter. So it'll be a little bit different than what you had in your book. And then to go ahead and preview, the next quarter will be the study of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. And so if you want to read ahead, the next lesson that I start on is going to be in 1 Thessalonians. And those are both short books in the New Testament. And so it should be an interesting study to look at those. Clint and I had a good trip, and thank you for praying for us. We drove more than 2,000 miles and met with numerous different people in different places, some of which was all in Spanish and really taxed our brains, but it was a good trip, and we got to visit with a lot of people who are very busy doing missions in the places that they are. So that was good for us to see and meet with all of them. So let's go ahead and start with Daniel, and we're gonna look first at chapter 9, because that is the focus of the lesson in your book. And chapter 9, all the way down from verse 1 all the way down to verse 19, is a sort of a prayer for the people of Israel that Daniel makes, or a lament. And he talks about how they've gone away from God, and they're sorry, and they shouldn't have done that. And he's begging God, please incline your ear towards us, and your eye, open your eyes to see what we're going through, and things like that. So that whole section there is the lament. And now, after that, the angel Gabriel comes and sort of gives a response to Daniel, and begins to he begins to have a vision, and where he is told things. The first part of it is in chapter 9 and verse 24 down to the end of that chapter. We won't read, but in that chapter, it talks about weeks being decreed and times to come after it mentions the Messiah and how the Messiah will then be cut off and have nothing, and the prince of evil, or the prince who is wanting to destroy things, will come. And so it begins to talk about end times in that latter part of chapter 9. And so then in chapter 10, it begins what seems to be like a new vision that Daniel saw in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. This vision came to Daniel. And so you remember that we talked about Daniel served several kings in the time that he was in Babylon. And so this was one of them, King Cyrus, king of Persia, was one of the latter ones maybe that Daniel served. And Daniel had been fasting and praying or mourning for 3 weeks, and then he sees this vision. And the vision is of a man, but not exactly a man, and you'll have to read that at the beginning of chapter 10. There was a man dressed in linen, his waist was girded with gold, and his body was like beryl, so it was like glowing, and his face the appearance of lightning. His eyes were like flaming torches. And so Daniel, when he sees this vision, he turns a deathly pallor, it says. So he about to faint, and falls to the ground with his face to the ground. So he either faints or collapses. And then a hand touches him and sets him on his hands and knees and says, Daniel, I've been sent to you. And he stands up trembling. This is in chapter 10 that I'm referring to now. And says, don't be afraid, Daniel. We're coming in response to your words. We've been battling the prince of the kingdom of Persia. So I thought that was an interesting thing that was said there, because it's like there are spiritual warfare or battles going on, but maybe between the angels and demons or the devil himself at times that we really don't even realize that's happening, but it's referred to a couple of times in here. And so this is, it's interesting to read through this, but there's so much here that we can't read through all of it today. So these angels then begin to tell Daniel of wars to come. And it talks about the king of the north and the king of the south, and they're going to fight each other and all of that. And now this is where, again, one of those times where some people, would say these were wars that were to come very soon in the Old Testament over into the New Testament in that period of time. And then other people would interpret these as wars that happened through history and that sort of thing. And I don't have an interpretation because I don't know. And, I'm sure I've said this before, but this is my philosophy on these sorts of things. I know that very clearly the Bible says that Jesus is coming back one day. And I know that the time has been set for that. And I don't know what the time is. And so I'm going to make the focus of my life to try to share the gospel with people and to share that information with them, because that really is all the information that we need, is to know that Jesus is coming and we need to be ready. And that a time has been set for it. It's not just a vague, it might happen. I mean, it is going to happen, and it's going to happen at an appointed time. And so, other than that, I'm not worried about when that happens. If that happens before the 1,000 years, after the 1,000 years, during the 1,000 years, or some other configuration of time, that doesn't matter to me. The main thing is that I know that it is going to happen, and I need to be ready for whenever that does happen. So, that's why I don't get deep into the speculation about these things, that are mentioned here. But I do find it interesting to read about it. And it continues on through the whole chapter 11 to talk about the end times. And at the end time, the king of the south battling the king of the north, they will enter the beautiful land and battle there and many countries will fall. And so, like I said, it's up to interpretation as to what time frame we're talking about when all of those things would have happened or will be happening, in the future. And so then it talks about the prince of Persia again there. Let's see what they call him. The king of the south, but in my Bible I think it refers to that also as being the prince of Persia. Anyway, he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many. I'm now down at the end of chapter 11. He will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. And so then we get to chapter 12. So I thought for today, the scripture that we'll actually read is going to be chapter 12, because that concludes the book, and I think that's a good way for us to do it. Knowing that, I know most of you will go back and you'll read those other chapters where the wars are predicted and things like that, and you may draw your own conclusions. So let's begin to read then in chapter 12. Now, at that time is going to, it seems to refer back to the things that happened in chapter 11. So it makes me think that at least some of the things that are mentioned in chapter 11 are yet to come, because the chapter 12 sort of clearly talks about the end of time. So now, chapter 12. Now at that time, Michael, the great prince, who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise. And there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be rescued. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but the others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. So, you can see from that it's talking about the end of time, not the end of a war that might have been in the past, but the end of time. And it talks about the book. And this book of life is referred to several times through Daniel. Jesus referred to it. It's referred to in the Revelation. And, maybe some other places in the Bible. But I think it is a real book and important if it's referred to that many times. And so, when I was a little girl growing up, you heard, this taught in Sunday school that your name needs to be written in the book of life. And how you get your name in the book is by choosing to follow Jesus, And so, I feel like it is a real book. And it's referred to here in the way that it is a real book. So those whose names are written in the book will be rescued at that time. But then everyone else is going to disgrace and everlasting contempt. And so then let's read on in verse 3. Those who have insight will shine brightly like the brightness of the expanse of heaven, and those who lead the many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But as for you, Daniel, conceal these words and seal up the book until the end of time. Many will go back and forth, and knowledge will increase. So these things are being told to Daniel, and maybe even more things than what he's written here, because they tell him to seal up the book until the end of time. And it also says, it talks about those who lead people to righteousness. And, that's important for all of us, not that just that we find righteousness and insight, as it mentions, but that we lead people to righteousness. Now let's read in verse 5. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, 2 others were standing, one on this bank of the river, and the other on that bank of the river. And one said to the man dressed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, how long will it be until the end of these wonders? I heard the man dressed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, as he raised his right hand and his left toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. And as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be completed. Now, again, we don't know what a time is. What is that measurement of time? Is it 1,000 years? Is it a certain number of months? We don't know really what a time is, but it says it's a time, times, plural, and half a time. So whatever length of time that is, we can be assured that it has been set. That's the thing we should take away from this. Not that we speculate on, get out the calendar and begin to minus and plus. Okay, Jesus lived this long. Let's take away that many years, and let's add, the slowing down of the sun or whatever. People really spend their life focused on trying to predict when Jesus is coming back. And it is sad to me in a way, because think of the energy and the passion that they could put into sharing the gospel with other people rather than trying to focus on pinpointing when Jesus is coming back. And so, but it is, obviously from this, it is clearly set. And the time or times have been set as to when it's going to happen. As soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be completed. Okay, now I'm in verse 8. As for me, I heard but could not understand. So I said, my Lord, what will be the outcome of these events? He said, go your way, Daniel, for these words are concealed and sealed up until the end time. Many will be purged, purified, and refined, but the wicked will act wickedly, and none of the wicked will understand, but those who have insight will understand. So, that is what we see even now. In Daniel's time, they were saying, Daniel, don't worry about it. These things are sealed up. They are not to be revealed, I guess you might say. And they haven't been, have they? It would be easy to share the gospel and evangelize maybe if you knew for a fact, and it had been written in the Bible that on so-and-so date, Jesus is coming back. I mean, my goodness. Then we could proclaim that date to everyone and say, hey, buddy, you better be ready because this is coming. And we should share the gospel with that sense of urgency, but we don't, because we don't know when it's going to happen. But it says here that the people who have insight will know, and the people who don't have insight are not going to know. So it's the same today. People look at Christians who say that Jesus is coming back, and they look at us as if we are foolish or that we are following something that's made up. Like that was back in the old days. Those ancient writings, they don't mean anything, and this is modern times now, and we're all supposed to be more intelligent than to follow these ancient writings. But that is very not true. And these things are important for us to study and also to remind ourselves that this is a very real thing. Now let's go on in verse 11. From the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. Now that's very specific, isn't it? How blessed is he who keeps waiting and attains to the 1,335 days. But as for you, go your way to the end, then you will enter into rest and rise again for your allotted portion at the end of the age. So, this being, the man in linen, who had the glowing face and eyes of lightning, which you might say is an image of God, an image of Jesus, something like that, He's the one who has made this proclamation that, hey, from the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, and that's mentioned in another place in Daniel, the abomination that causes desolation. When that is set up, there will be 1,290 days. Now, the regular sacrifice, I did a little research on that. The regular sacrifice, daily sacrifices of animals, ended when the temple was destroyed after Jesus had ascended into heaven, and then in the year, I think it's 70 AD, when the temple was destroyed by the Romans. At that time, the daily sacrifice ended. Now, nowadays, the Jewish people pay money that sort of takes the place, I guess you might say, of that sacrifice that was made. And you can correct me if I'm wrong on any of those facts and figures I just gave you, but this was what I was able to look up and read. And then it mentions, okay, when the regular sacrifice is abolished, so from that time, and the abomination of desolation is set up. Now, I don't know what the abomination of desolation is, or the abomination that causes desolation. I'm not sure. But at times I have wondered, because it says in another place in Daniel that this abomination of desolation is going to be set up on the holy mountain in Jerusalem. And if you go to Jerusalem, and you may have visited Jerusalem, then what you see on the Temple Mount, what they call the Temple Mount, what is there now is a very big mosque that has been built. I don't know what year that was built in. I should have researched that, sorry. But, it is an abomination to me that that mosque has been built there, and that Muslims lay claim to the Temple Mount, which obviously, was for Israel, for the temple. And so it is an abomination to me, at least. Now, whether that is the abomination, I don't know. There could be something else. But anyway, it says after those two things happen, which seem to have already happened, there will be 1,290 days. Now, again, we begin to speculate, don't we? How long really is 1,290 days? Is that, it's obviously not actual days, because the end of time has not come, So is it years? It would be more than that. You figure it out, and then let me know what you come up with. But what he says to Daniel is what we are going to take away from it. As for you, go your way to the end. Then you will enter into rest and rise again for your allotted portion at the end of the age. So they were clearly, the vision, Daniel is clearly told, don't worry about all this. It is a thing, and Daniel's written it down for us to know that, hey, this is a thing that's going to happen, and it is real. But it's not something to worry about. It's something really, if anything else, to rejoice and know that God's got it under control. That we will, when we die, enter into our rest. And then we will rise up at the appointed time. We will, Jesus said to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. There are many places throughout Scripture that reassure us that there is a life after this life. Thank the Lord for that. Especially these days, isn't it? Because if this was all of the pleasantness that we might ever be able to experience, that would be sad. But to know that there's a wonderful life that we're going to live after this one, and that one will be everlasting or eternal. We won't have to work. We won't have to sell houses. We're not going to be sick. We're not going to have diseases. And it's just going to be wonderfulness forever. And so we can be encouraged by that. And to know that, even from long, long ago, God has his plan set in motion. So thank you for being with me today and for studying together with me. I look forward to jumping over then to 1 Thessalonians. We'll start there and continue on with our lessons. And I'll see you next time.